A man stands on the epochal reburial ceremony of former Hungarian Prime Minister Imre Nagy. This figure, filled with youthful fervor, steers the crowd demanding free elections and Soviet withdrawal. In a voice shaking with conviction, he declares, "Believe in our own power can dismantle the communist dictatorship." To a sea of 200,000 people, the brass held as a dream of a brighter Hungary. This man is Viktor Orban in 1989. Yet, intriguingly, Orban conveniently left out that he himself held a minor role in the Komsomol organization, and his father, Balint György Orban, was a propagandist for the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party. Intriguing, isn't it? I'm Maria Drutska, and your long-anticipated journey into the enigmatic world of Viktor Orban begins now. You've been asking, and I could not let you please go unheard. How could I turn a blind eye to this puppet of Putin, notoriously known as a dictator? The epithet coined by Orban's adversaries and several Western European and American media outlets, symbolizing his authoritarian dictatorial governance style. Brace yourself, this journey is going to be quite the ride. At the tender age of 24, Viktor Orban emerged in 1988 as the architect of one of Hungary's first opposition parties, Fidesz. A scant 6 months later, in January 1990, Orban, a former Komsomol secretary and law graduate of the University of Budapest, suspended his internship at Pembroke College, Oxford, to plunge into Hungary's first free elections. The result? Fidesz captured 9% of the votes, and its leader commanded its parliamentary faction. In its early stage, Orban's party brandished the banners of liberalism, environmentalism, and even a touch of anarchism. Yet, after the disappointing 1994 elections, where Fidesz managed a measly 7%, the party began to shift its ideological stance. Orban noticed a void on the right created by the electoral laws of the previous ruling right-centrist Christian Democratic Party, Hungarian Democratic Forum, and Fidesz executed a sharp political pivot from liberal to conservative. It seems Orban is not too attached to political values. He can easily dismiss them and espouse others. Does the story strike a familiar chord? If the chameleonic nature of Alexei Navalny crosses your mind, you're spot on. Navalny also exhibits a similar knack for shifting ideologies based on political winds. Now observe how Fidesz managed to bolster its position. After the 1994 elections, Gyula Horn ascended to the office of the Prime Minister. Horn's administration grappled with the grave economic crisis, necessitating reforms. The Lajos-Bokros reforms package was instrumental in stabilizing Hungary's macroeconomic indicators and trimming the budget deficit. However, this stability came at the expenses of imposed import tax, social benefits, and the devaluation of the forint, measures that inevitably stirred dissatisfaction among those who couldn't comprehend the need for short-term sacrifices for long-term prosperity. With reforms implemented and economy on the mend, Orban stormed into the 1998 elections wielding promises of state-backed housing programs, family support, and aid for Hungarians abroad. The simplicity of his platform was also its potency. Fidesz underwent a dramatic transformation, a tactic that paid off in the 1998 elections, where the party snagged more than 29% of the vote. At just 35, Viktor Orban clinched the title of the youngest prime minister in Hungary's modern history. Though he honored his campaign promises, he failed to hold his ground against the socialists and had to relinquish his office. It wasn't until 2010, after 2 consecutive losses, that he managed to reclaim the seat. Fidesz achieved a constitutional majority in the parliament for the first time in independent Hungary, effectively cementing its power. The interlude between 2002 and 2010 proved crucial for Orban and Fidesz. The 2002 election loss underscored the importance of steadfast media support. Thus, Orban and Fidesz seized control on Hír TV, Magyar Nemzet, Lancet Radio, and other media entities owned by one of the Orban's close confidants, Lajos Simicska. Simicska was not an arbitrary choice, although there were other minor media moguls. The catch is, in 2015, Simicska dared to publicly rebuke Orban in rather, shall we say, uncouth terms. Orban retorted by ostracing Simicska, one of his closest allies, and effectively removed him from the list of state tender winners, and ultimately banning his companies from public tenders for 3 years. This story paints a vivid picture of Orban as a shrewd politician, but let's get back to the media. Picture this: the ruling party enjoys state resources to the tune of 130 billion forints just from the 2022 budget alone. That's not to mention the 500 media outlets scooped by Fidesz-friendly businessmen. In 2018, they transferred them to a specially created Central European Press and Media Foundation, which is managed by media managers and politicians close to Orban. When this holding was created, the Media Council had to decide whether it was a monopoly, but ultimately the government called it a strategically important project, which is already beyond the competence of the Council. Overall, everything went in favor of the government and Fidesz. In Hungary, as before, there are independent media, but most of them operate only on the internet, which allows them to demonstrate to the European Union free media. But how free they really are? Now, that's a million foreign question, but let's be honest and ask ourselves, what virtues and achievements allow Viktor Orban not only to stay in power, but also to expand his influence? He has been riding high on the economic upswings in Hungary, a phoenix that rose from the ashes of the 2008 global crisis. Tossed in some EU funds, Hungary joined the Union in 2004, and voila! Orban's empire grew. 6 years later, in 2010, Hungary began to receive large subsidies from EU funds for the development, and the Hungarian government began to carefully monitor that the money ended up in people's pockets close to the government and accordingly to Orban himself. Systemic corruption is another distinctive feature of Viktor Orban's Hungary. The Prime Minister and his gang control businesses contributing around 30% of the country's GDP, spreading their tendrils into the service, tourism, public catering, agriculture sectors, and beyond. Orban dismisses allegations of corruption, painting it instead as a rise of the national bourgeoisie in Hungary. Déjà vu? Anyone? It's like looking at mini Russia. Let's look at a specific example. This is Lărinț Mészáros, the mayor of Orban's native village, who spent a significant part of his life working as an ordinary locksmith. In 2006, his company had a capital equivalent to 33,000 euros, and already in 2017, this man became the fifth richest person in Hungary, with assets estimated as approximately 390 million euros. I'm all believing for startups, applauding the startup genius, the masterful businessman. Heck, I even have a soft spot for Santa Claus. But Mészáros? He smells more of state budget than startup. Currently, Orban's ally is the largest recipient of government orders in the country, whether it is the implementation of projects in the construction industry or the supply of mineral water to state enterprises. His first company, Mészáros and Mészáros, which initially dealt with the installation of gas appliances, now regularly signs contracts for the implementation of projects funded by the EU structural funds. For instance, this firm built a bridge across the Danube, which is supposed to connect Hungary with Slovakia. The contract value is 92 million euros. The same company also built a football stadium in the village of Felcsút, located very close to Orban's dacha. It's indeed great to have the Prime Minister as your hometown buddy, huh? And this is just one of the examples that can be provided to make a conclusion about Orban's environment. But media control and economic strings aren't the only puppets Orban plays. With a constitutional majority, Fidesz, since 2010, has held the reins of not just the economy but also Hungary's internal politics. As its initiative, even the constitution was changed. It now includes provisions about the fundamental role of Christianity and the protection of traditional family. The powers of the Constitutional Court have been reduced, and the electoral legislation has become more convenient for those in power. For example, the lower threshold of turnout in elections was abolished, and ethnic Hungarians living in Ukraine, Serbia, Slovakia, and Romania, in territories the country lost as a result of World War I, were given the right to vote by mail. However, immigrants, many of whom do not support Fidesz, have not experienced such relaxation. In general, Fidesz, led by Orban, has adopted Hungarian revisionism to secure voters' voices. Hungary made aggressive demands to neighboring states in which Hungarian diasporas formed after the Treaty of Trianon. Orban encouraged the creation of Hungarian autonomies, particularly in the Ukrainian Transcarpathia, and increased funding for Hungarian communities and organizations abroad. Representatives of Hungary have repeatedly condemned the language law in Ukraine, noting it does not behoove the title nations to find representatives of national minorities, including Hungarians, for using their native language. Interestingly, at the beginning of his career, Viktor Orban was alien to most Hungarians and even slightly resembled Emmanuel Macron. But over the years in power, Orban managed to change not only the country but also himself. He began to cosplay the average Hungarian, and he is sort of a tough brush, a bit politically incorrect, yet oddly appealing for most Hungarians. Also, the party's political technologies constantly came up with enemies that helped Orban and Fidesz stay in power. Over the years, Viktor Orban and his party have protected Hungarians from the following. In the build-up to the 2014 elections, Orban wove a story of danger, claiming George Soros, an American with Hungarian roots, planned to sow discord and seize control of Hungary. A plot so convincing that many Hungarians overlooked the fact that Orban was once a grantee of the Soros foundations. than Brussels, which in Hungary, thanks to Orban and Fidesz, is not perceived as the headquarters of the European Union, even though many in the country welcomed its accession, but as a hostile force trying to subjugate the Hungarians. In 2015, Orban's government found a new enemy in the Roma and migrants. They erected a formidable barrier along the Serbian and Croatian borders, defending Hungary from Middle Eastern refugees, while simultaneously stoking the flames of anti-migrant sentiment through the media and non-profit organizations. The media law, similar to Russian regulations on foreign agents, appeared in Hungary in 2017. Thus, the National Media and Communications Authority emerged. Later, the European Court ruled to abolish this law, as well as the legislative package called Stop Soros, which held legal penalties for aiding migrants, particularly in asylum applications. Now, after this whirlwind tour of Orban's political chess moves, you may be wondering, could this man possibly find a kinship with Vladimir Putin? Well, the answer is resigning yes. While Orban has once decried Russia, lambasting the socialists in power for their support of the South Stream project and branding European governments as Putin's puppets, his tune changed drastically after a trip to St. Petersburg in 2009 for the Congress of United Russia, where he met Putin. Returning to Hungary, Orban presented his encounter with Putin as an official meeting, though Medvedev held the presidential title at that time. Orban had a clear understanding of who truly held the Kremlin's reins. This meeting marked the beginning of Orban's newfound admiration for Russian politics, a transformation that would have significant implications for Hungary's relationship with Russia. Upon regaining power in 2010, Orban launched the Opening to the East policy, an initiative seeking to explore new markets beyond the European Union. This policy stirred up numerous controversies, such as the signing of a major contract with Russia in December 2014 for the upgrade of a nuclear power plant in Paks, which drew sharp criticism from Europe. As the involvement of the aggressor country in the works at the nuclear power plant is actually a legislation of the annexation of Crimea and the armed aggression in Donbass. By that time, Russia had already got under economic sanctions after the annexation of Crimea and the deaths of all passengers of MH17 flight. Moscow still denies its involvement in this disaster. It's intriguing to note that Hungary doesn't have substantial economic incentives to foster such close ties with Russia, given that Russia only accounts for 2–3% of Hungary's foreign trade. However, Hungary has sizable investments in Russia, primarily financed by the Hungarian state bank Exim, which 80% of its portfolio linked to Russia. Simultaneously, Hungary remains heavily reliant on Russian energy supplies, including nuclear power, gasoline, and particular gas. Despite the potential risk, Orban has made no attempts to explore alternatives to Russian energy, resulting in Hungary's complete dependence on it. This means that if there is an import ban, Hungary will face the deepest recession in Europe. Orban often takes pride in his ability to secure favorable prices for Russian gas through his foreign policy strategies. In early 2022, a new 15-year contract was signed where Putin claimed that Hungary's price was 5 times lower than the average. However, the actual terms remain concealed, and it's possible Hungary paid the market price or something close to it. Orban's dramatic pivot to a pro-Russian stance has spawned numerous theories. One theory suggests that Russian authorities hold compromising information on Orban. In 2017, The Insider reported on his ties with the Russian and Ukrainian criminal authority Semyon Mogilevich, who lived in Budapest in the 1990s and was detained in Moscow in 2008. He was later released. In 1994, before the parliamentary elections, Orban could have received a suitcase with 1 million German marks from Mogilevich, and a video confirming this allegedly ended up in the possession of the Russian authorities. Another theory proposes that Orban seeks to occupy a unique position between Brussels and the Kremlin. Such a political strategic step in which Orban is close to Russia but at the same time is a member of the EU. So it turns out to be a certain symbiosis when for Orban relations with Russia are a lever of pressure on the West, and vice versa for Putin relations with Hungary are a way to influence the West. But Orban has no illusions that an alliance with Putin can replace Hungary's alliance with Europe. He understands perfectly well that membership in the EU and NATO is exactly what gives Hungary value in the Kremlin's eyes. The pro-Orban Here TV channel boldly declared in January 2022, "Russia is not going to attack Ukraine. Every fool knows that," a sentiment echoed by other Hungarian media controlled by Orban and his party. Neither the opposition coalition nor Fidesz anticipated the outbreak of war in Ukraine. In the initial chaos, Orban was visibly shaken and anxious, but within a few days, he began to assert that Hungary should stay out of what he termed as a war between two Slavic nations. The fact that Fidesz was able to quickly respond to the changing situation and restructure its pre-election campaign is not surprising. The Hungarian government often conducts private public opinion polls to understand what people like and how they feel, and always tries to benefit from it. Officially, Hungary condemned Russia's aggression. Together with our allies in the European Union and NATO, we condemn Russia's military attack, Orban said on February 24 in a video posted on his Facebook page. At the same time, emphasizing that the Hungarian government must first think about the safety of its own citizens. However, Orban did not agree with the EU's sanctions against Russia, but he and his country did not veto them. At the same time, the Hungarian government refuses to supply arms to Ukraine through its territory. This was done to please Putin and to provoke Ukraine. Over recent years, a frost has descended on the relations between Hungary and Ukraine. In 2017, Ukraine passed the education law, which provides for teaching in Ukrainian from the 5th grade for national minorities. And since 2019, the law on the state language has been in effect, which established Ukrainian as the sole state language in the country. This seriously affected more than 150,000 ethnic Hungarians of Transcarpathia. The problem was that Hungarian was even used during school lessons, and children were not educated in the state language at all. And this law established the need to teach in Ukrainian in all public schools. Interestingly, no one forbade the Hungarians to open private schools, but for some reason Hungary tried to pressure Ukraine and began to interfere with its relations with the EU and NATO. The pressure from Hungary was not strong enough to force Ukrainians to change their policy. Ukraine was not ready for compromise, but Budapest did not give up and it was a stalemate. When it comes to discussing the Ukraine-Russia war, Hungarian media outlets close to the government like Here TV or Magyar Nemzet often thread a line, never pointing fingers at Russia as an aggressor, much less uttering Putin's name. Echoing the narrative of Russian propaganda, political program experts on Fidesz-controlled channels claim that Russia is saving Ukrainians and compared Volodymyr Zelensky with Hitler. Here are some of Orban's pronouncements on the Russian-Ukrainian war and Ukraine in general. He echoed the Kremlin's narrative to Germany's build, asserting Ukraine's lack of sovereignty and reliance on the US. Repeated toleration of the concept of Great Hungary, thereby legalizing claims to the ethnic territories of other countries. He has demeaned Ukraine by calling it a no-man's land and likening it to Afghanistan. In an outrageous act, Hungary repatriated Ukrainian soldiers captured by Russia, a highly unacceptable move, say. Perhaps the most scandalous narrative propagated by Orban's regime is the assertion that arming Ukraine to defend against Russia will only prolong the conflict. Thus, peace negotiations should be prioritized. Peeling back the layers of Orban's rule, one gets an uncanny sense of déjà vu. The resemblance to Putin is striking, albeit a toned-down version, a dictator in a business suit, if you will. I guess that Hungary's presence in NATO and the EU is a restraining factor for Orban. We do not see contracts killing of competitors or anything more horrible. Nevertheless, he remains a crafty player, adept at manipulating public sentiment, dominating the media, and ensuring the prosperity of his inner circle. From this point of view, Hungary appears poised on the edge of a precipice, with aftershocks from Orban's rule waiting to rumble. An intricate web of government corruption, monopolization of industries, media manipulation, betrayed allies, energy crisis due to dependence on Russian supplies, and the impending political and economical turmoil looms over the horizon. That's it. See you in my next video.